Emily Parker had always been a quiet type, the sort of neighbor who kept to herself but made sure her yard reflected the care she poured into her home. A schoolteacher by day, she spent her evenings kneeling in the soil, trimming rose bushes and planting tulips in perfect rows along the walkway. Her yard was her sanctuary, and over the years, it had become the prettiest spot on the street, or so she thought. On a sunny Saturday morning, Emily found an envelope taped to her front door. It was from the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. The wording was sharp and impersonal. Her flower bed, which lined the entire front of her property, was non-compliant with HOA guidelines. She was ordered to remove it within 10 days or face daily fines. Emily was baffled. She had reviewed the HOA bylaws when she moved in 3 years ago, and there was no rule about flower beds. Still, the letter listed vague complaints: unauthorized landscaping, visual disruption to uniformity, and failure to submit for approval. The notice was signed by Marjorie Kane, HOA president, the same neighbor who had glared at Emily from across the street during last spring's block party when everyone complimented Emily's tulips. At the time, Emily thought nothing of it. Now she wondered if jealousy had turned into something far more malicious. Emily decided to investigate before reacting. She spent her afternoon reading the HOA guidelines line by line. Nothing explicitly banned flower beds. The rules only restricted major exterior alterations, like building structures, painting houses neon colors, or removing trees. Her small flower garden didn't fit any of those categories. The next week, she received a second notice, this one harsher than the first. The fines would start at $100 per day, escalating if she didn't comply. Marjorie had even taken photos of the flower bed, attaching them as evidence. Emily could practically hear the smugness in every word of the letter. Neighbors began to whisper. Some sided with the HOA, grumbling that rules kept property values high. Others, who admired Emily's garden, thought it was ridiculous. But no one spoke out openly. Everyone knew Marjorie had a reputation for targeting people who resisted her. Emily considered tearing up the flowers just to avoid conflict, but something inside her snapped. Why should she back down when she wasn't breaking any rules? This wasn't just about flowers anymore. It was about standing her ground. She called her friend Mark, a local attorney who had handled HOA disputes before. Mark confirmed what Emily suspected. There was no legal basis for fines. If the HOA tried to enforce them, Emily could fight back and probably win. But Mark also warned her, HOAs have time and money. They'll keep pushing until you give up or find a way around them. That night, sitting on her porch, Emily stared at her flower bed and thought of a plan. If Marjorie wanted to nitpick about landscaping, then Emily would give her something to really complain about. But this time, it would be perfectly legal, airtight against every clause in the HOA book. Emily started sketching ideas, elaborate, lush, and undeniably bold. She wouldn't just defend her flower bed. She would transform her entire yard into something unforgettable. By the end of the week, she had a plan that made her grin every time she thought about it. The HOA wouldn't be able to touch her, no matter how hard they tried. And so began Emily's war, not with anger, but with creativity and precision. Her garden was about to grow into something no HOA rule could stop. Emily wasted no time. Her weekends, once spent casually tending to flowers, became a full-scale operation. She ordered soil by the truckload, brought in exotic plants from nurseries hours away, and sketched detailed blueprints for every inch of her yard. If the HOA wanted to claim her flower bed was unauthorized, she would transform it into something undeniably spectacular and completely legal. The first step was research. Emily combed through the HOA bylaws again, highlighting every section about landscaping. She learned the association could only restrict structural changes or artificial alterations that disrupt neighborhood uniformity. Living plants, however, were treated as natural elements, meaning she could plant anything she wanted, as long as it wasn't poisonous or invasive. There were no size limits, no density rules, and no requirement to submit plans for approval. This loophole was all Emily needed. If Marjorie wanted to play games, she would learn quickly that Emily knew how to win by the rules. Neighbors noticed the changes almost immediately. Trucks delivered towering ferns, young palm trees, bamboo stalks, and rare flowering shrubs. What was once a charming flower bed slowly evolved into a dense, vibrant landscape. Emily didn't just plant flowers anymore. She built layers, creating shaded paths and natural arches out of greenery. Within 2 weeks, her yard no longer looked like anyone else's on the block. Marjorie Kane, of course, was livid. HOA board members began showing up at Emily's house, clipboards in hand, snapping photos and muttering to themselves. They sent another letter threatening additional fines for noncompliance, accusing Emily of creating an eyesore. Emily sent back a simple response through her lawyer. Cite the rules she was breaking. The HOA couldn't. As Emily's garden grew wilder, neighbors became divided. Some loved the lush paradise forming on her property and secretly cheered her on. Others whispered that she was ruining the neighborhood's look. Marjorie made it her mission to convince everyone Emily was a threat to their property values, knocking on doors and spreading fear. But the harder she pushed, the more people questioned why a few plants were such a big deal. Emily remained calm. She spent her evenings carefully arranging plants, adding decorative stones, and winding paths through foliage. What looked like chaos from the street was actually meticulous design, a perfectly planned jungle that still complied with every HOA rule. But Marjorie wasn't finished. She escalated the fight, calling emergency HOA meetings and drafting new landscaping regulations designed to stop Emily. What Marjorie didn't realize was that any new rule wouldn't apply retroactively to Emily's existing garden. Her jungle was safe. By the time summer arrived, Emily's yard had become unrecognizable. Vines trailed over trellises, tall tropical plants created shaded corners, and colorful flowers bloomed in every direction. The street buzzed with curiosity. Children rode their bikes past her house just to stare at the miniature rainforest behind her picket fence. The HOA's frustration boiled over. Marjorie hired a private landscaper to evaluate Emily's property, hoping to find violations like hidden weeds or pest hazards. When the report came back clean, Marjorie exploded at the next board meeting, accusing Emily of mocking the HOA. Emily didn't care. Every letter they sent her went unanswered except through her lawyer, who continued to send polite but firm reminders. Show us the violation. The HOA couldn't touch her, and Emily knew it. But her victory wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about sending a message. The more Marjorie tried to crush her, the more determined Emily became to make her jungle even bigger, even brighter, even bolder. What started as a simple flower bed had become a neighborhood spectacle. And Emily was just getting started. The night of the HOA's annual meeting arrived, and the clubhouse was packed. Word had spread to the neighborhood that Marjorie intended to rewrite the bylaws to give the board full control over non-standard landscaping. Everyone knew it was a direct strike at Emily. Emily sat quietly in the back row while Marjorie stood at the podium, voice sharp and commanding, laying out her vision for the neighborhood. She spoke of protecting property values, of preserving uniformity, and hinted at unruly yards ruining the community's look. She never said Emily's name, but everyone knew exactly who she meant. When it was time for a vote, Marjorie expected an easy win. Instead, silence filled the room. One neighbor finally stood and said, "Why are we spending dues chasing someone who just likes plants? Her yard's the nicest one here." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Another neighbor added, "If you're going to find Emily, find me too. I just planted tomatoes." Laughter broke out. Marjorie's face flushed bright red as one by one, homeowners spoke up against the rule. No one, not a single person, supported her motion. When the board finally called for a vote, the result was humiliating. 0 in favor, unanimous against. Emily didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Marjorie slammed her papers shut, muttered something about ungrateful neighbors, and stormed out of the clubhouse. By the next morning, she had resigned as HOA president. Emily walked past her jungle on her way home, the soft glow of porch lights hitting the leaves. For the first time in months, her street felt peaceful again. Her yard wasn't just safe. It was admired, a symbol that standing your ground could pay off. When the HOA issued fines anyway, Emily called her lawyer. The case went straight to court. Inside the small wood-paneled courtroom, Marjorie looked confident. She spoke about neighborhood standards, waving printed photos of Emily's lush yard like they were evidence of a crime. But when the judge asked her to show the exact rule Emily had violated, Marjorie froze. Emily's lawyer walked the court through the HOA bylaws line by line. Landscaping of living plants was not regulated. There were no size limits. There was no required approval process. Every fine the HOA had sent was baseless. The judge wasted no time. He ruled immediately in Emily's favor, ordering the HOA to not only drop all fines, but also reimburse Emily for her legal expenses. The judgment was read aloud for the entire courtroom to hear. Marjorie sat in silence as the gavel came down. Her power, so absolute on the street, meant nothing under the law. When word spread, neighbors couldn't stop talking about it. The HOA's leadership lost all credibility, and Marjorie quietly stepped down. Emily's victory didn't just protect her own garden. It sent a clear warning to the board. Abuse of power would not be tolerated. That evening, Emily sat on her porch, looking at the layers of ferns, palms, and flowering vines she had planted. The jungle she built out Defiance had turned into a fortress. She hadn't just won for herself. She made sure no one else in Oak Ridge Estates would be bullied again. By late summer, Emily's yard looked like a private botanical garden. And while Marjorie fumed, something unexpected happened. The neighborhood started benefiting from it. A real estate agent showing a nearby house told prospective buyers, "This street has character. Just look at that amazing yard over there." Curious neighbors started to notice too. Home values were actually climbing. People stopped calling it an eyesore and started calling it unique curb appeal. Even the HOA treasurer pointed out at a board meeting that Emily's property had brought positive attention to Oak Ridge Estates. Slowly, the hostility faded. Finally, Marjorie had to admit defeat. She showed up at Emily's door, not with another letter, but with an awkward smile. The HOA wanted Emily's help to beautify other yards in the neighborhood. Emily agreed on one condition. They would never again try to control homeowners who followed the rules. The board had no choice but to accept. Within months, several neighbors planted their own elaborate gardens, and the once rigid, uniform subdivision transformed into one of the most colorful streets in town. Emily's jungle wasn't just legal. It had set a new trend. On a quiet evening, Emily sat in her hammock, hidden under the canopy of vines she'd grown, listening to the hum of crickets. What began as a petty fight had turned into something beautiful. Proof that standing firm could turn even an HOA battle into a win for everyone.